Hi, everybody, and welcome to Lovefraud Live. Perhaps you suspect that someone in your life has a serious personality disorder. You've been reading everything you can find on narcissists, sociopaths, and maybe even psychopaths. You keep coming across the term narcissistic supply. So, what is it? I'm Donna Andersen, author of Lovefraud.com, and tonight I'll explain the concept of narcissistic supply. At the end of my presentation, I'll answer your questions. To join the chat or ask a question, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. First of all, there is no official definition for narcissistic supply in the peer-reviewed psychological literature. In fact, if you plug the term into Google Scholar, the references are pretty slim. Tiffany Kettermann, a licensed professional counselor, has a webinar on Lovefraud called Understanding and Recognizing Narcissistic Abuse. There's a link to it in the window below this video. Tiffany says that narcissistic supply is anything or anyone that feeds the narcissistic person's ego, keeps that person artificially pumped up, and protects their fragile view of themselves. So here are some examples of narcissistic supply: good looks, fame, admiration, a prestigious career, compliments, being the expert or the savior, having a successful partner, and the image of a perfect family. Tiffany describes narcissism, the personality disorder, as a huge tank that needs constant filling. It's an addiction, a need for someone to provide admiration, attention, and constant reinforcement to prove to narcissists that their egos are protected. And that's what narcissistic supply is for. The whole idea of narcissism began with Sigmund Freud, who founded psychoanalysis in the early 1900s. The term narcissistic supply originally concerned the essential needs of babies and toddlers to maintain their mental and emotional equilibrium, according to Darlene Lancer, who is a licensed marriage and family therapist. Darlene was writing in Psychology Today, and she said that Freud identified two main paths to fulfilling narcissistic supply: ingratiation and aggression. First, narcissists ingratiate themselves using charm, seduction, and manipulation to control what others think. The objective is to get recognition from other people. If that doesn't work, Darlene says, they resort to aggression and narcissistic abuse. I was always a little bit skeptical about Freud's ideas. According to him, just about everything is based on a desire for sex. But apparently, Freud did come up with the concept of narcissistic supply, and it may describe what you've seen. As I said, there aren't many peer-reviewed scientific papers that reference narcissistic supply, and most of those that exist are actually from business researchers. One paper asked the question, do narcissistic CEOs rock the boat? It sought to establish a link between narcissistic supply and corporate risk-taking. The researchers found that the association between CEO narcissism and corporate risk-taking depended on the admiration, attention, and affirmation of superiority, in other words, the narcissistic supply, that CEOs received from their current positions. A narcissistic CEO with insufficient narcissistic supply, meaning that he worked for a small firm with small compensation, will crave more and will take more risks. But a narcissistic CEO with sufficient narcissistic supply, meaning she works for a large firm with a lot of compensation, will protect the status quo and be reluctant to take new risks. Another business researcher found that highly narcissistic CEOs undertake challenging or bold actions in order to obtain frequent praise and admiration. This researcher noted that the pursuit of narcissistic supply may result in a stronger likelihood of a CEO undertaking bold actions that could have detrimental consequences for the organization. So as you can see, the concept of narcissistic supply has implications in business as well as in personal situations. One of the few scientific papers in the psychology field that mentioned narcissistic supply was written by researchers at the Edinburgh Napier University in Scotland. They interviewed 7 members of a Facebook group called Narcissism Abuse and Recovery Hotline about their experiences with partners whom they believed were narcissists. The participants described experiencing narcissistic rage with incidents of domestic violence, as well as psychological and emotional abuse. The Edinburgh researchers identified 3 themes from their interviews. Number 1, the participants reported that narcissistic rage manifested as overt and covert abuse. Number 2, narcissists who displayed grandiose characteristics reacted with rage to challenges to their self-perceived authority. And finally, number 3, narcissists who exhibited vulnerable characteristics reacted with rage due to a fear of being abandoned. In other words, of losing their narcissistic supply. The authors found that grandiose narcissists were perceived to show little interpersonal distress and an inability to endure committed long-term relationships. Their partners, therefore, were nothing more than narcissistic supply. The participants reported feeling deceived as their whole relationship appeared to be an illusion, much like the identity portrayed by the narcissist. The paper includes many direct quotes from participants describing their experiences. As I read them, I wondered if the perpetrators were narcissists at all. Their behavior matched what I've heard from thousands of Lovefraud survey respondents. Now, Lovefraud has conducted 7 internet surveys, and in each one, we asked respondents to estimate the level of psychopathic traits in the individuals that they were describing. Usually, the scores were high, possibly indicating high levels of psychopathy. So, if the participants in the Edinburgh paper were actually describing psychopaths, well, no wonder that they were experiencing narcissistic rage. There is a lot of confusion about these diagnoses. So what's important for you to understand is that it's not just narcissists who are looking for narcissistic supply. It's what all these disordered individuals want. For narcissists, psychopaths, and antisocials, everything is always all about them. They are only concerned about getting what they want, and they will use anything and anyone to do it. Narcissistic supply means that you're an object. Here's the bottom line. Millions of people living around us are users. They do not have the ability for give and take in a relationship. It's you give and they take. These involvements are not healthy. In fact, they can be very damaging. There is no point being somebody's narcissistic supply. If you are feeling used in any relationship, get out of it. That's the presentation for tonight. Next, I'll answer your questions. If you want in-depth advice about your own situation, I offer personal consultations and also a deep emotional release service. There's a link in the description below this video. So, okay, well, while I wait for folks to catch up and possibly submit some questions, one of the things that I was interested in when I wrote this article and the script for this video is that last study that I talked about, the one that was done by the Edinburgh Napier University in Scotland. It was really interesting to me because they interviewed 7 people. I mean, that's how they conducted the survey. They did in-depth interviews with 7 people who believed that they were dealing with narcissists. But there was never any measure of whether or not the people were actually narcissists. And I was kind of surprised by that because, I mean, that would be one of the things that I would think would be important. I mean, are these people actually talking about narcissists? And because, as I said, when I was reading the quotes of how the participants reported their experiences, it was exactly the same stuff that I've heard thousands of times, you know, from all the people that I've spoken to, and plus all the surveys that we've done that described people with either antisocial personality disorder or psychopathy. And this points to a problem. Something that I've also noticed for a long time is that an awful lot of people are talking about narcissists, and I suspect that a lot of them aren't dealing just with narcissists. I think that a lot of people that they're describing likely have either antisocial personality disorder or psychopathy. But I think what's happened is that people still have an association that those with antisocial personality disorder, sociopaths or psychopaths are all serial killers. And so it's very hard for folks to figure out or to even conceive of the idea that they might be dealing with someone who is a sociopath, a psychopath, antisocial personality disorder. It's just too scary. So consequently, what they do is they simply refer to them as narcissists. And this goes on a lot. I mean, you know, it's actually kind of a little bit of detrimental for Lovefraud because we're talking about antisocial and sociopaths and everybody else is talking about narcissists. And I think a lot of the people who are describing narcissists are actually incorrect in how they're describing those individuals. I think, unfortunately, that many of them can be have more antisocial or psychopathic traits than they want to talk about. But essentially, narcissistic supply is anything that one of these individuals wants. I mean, essentially what they're looking for is someone to do whatever it is that they want. And it could be anything, and it could change all the time. I mean, that's one of the things that I've noticed is that, you know, what essentially do narcissists or antisocials or psychopaths want? It's like, well, it's, you know, whatever they happen to want at the moment, because it's always changing. You know, that's one of the problems with these folks is that since there is no real solid core inside, there's no passion. They you know, it's like flavor of the month or whatever makes them happy at any particular time. So that's, you know, what the narcissistic supply is. that they're looking for, and it can change. And I can't tell you how many times I think we did a video about this before. It's like, they're always moving the goalposts. Because now first they want this, you give them that, now they want this, you give them that, now they want this, and that's just their fluctuating desire for narcissistic supply, which can change at any time. So that's what we're looking for in these situations. Okay. Well, it looks like that quiet tonight. No questions. So thank you, everybody, for participating. And we'll be here next week with the next episode of Lovefraud Live. Thanks a lot. Good night.